photobiomodulation in and of itself can significantly address many of the causal factors that seem to influence memory loss.
Welcome to the Evolving Past Alzheimer's podcast, where we are focused on bringing you information to help prevent from developing and improve from suffering with brain diseases like Alzheimer's and other dementias. I'm Dr. Nate Bergman, a physician and Chief Scientific Wellness Officer at Kemper Cognitive Wellness, and I'll be your guide on these sound waves. So whether you're a baby boomer who's worried that your brain wiring just isn't working like it once was, or you have a loved one with the disease, or you yourself have already been diagnosed and are wondering, what do I do now? You'll want to listen to this podcast. Each episode, we introduce you to the top doers and thinkers that are revisioning Alzheimer's, dementia, and just generally things in life's second half. If you have questions or comments, check us out on social media. To support us, go to patreon.com/evolvingpast and consider hitting the button and becoming a patron of this show if you find these episodes valuable. That's Patreon, Patreon, patreon.com/evolvingpast. So here we go. Let's get better. Welcome back to the show. We want to welcome back a previous guest of ours, Dr. Marvin Berman. Dr. Berman has been somewhat of a mentor to me, teaching me about the fields of brain mapping and neurostimulation, which we're now using more and more in our offices here in Cleveland. Dr. Marvin Berman received his PhD in psychoeducational processes. He's done all kinds of interesting work recently, and the reason for our interview, he's been researching the application of EEG biofeedback and related technologies into the treatment of neuropsychological and neurodegenerative disorders, including Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease. He just completed a recent study in the field of photo-bio-modulation. And of course, I'm going to let Marvin explain photo-bio-modulation, but we've talked about this with him as well as several other guests in recent past. But it's essentially the idea that you can use low-level lasers or even LED lights to change the brain's energy and therefore the performance, its operating system. So welcome back to the show, Dr. Berman.
Great to be here, Nate. Thank you very much for having me.
Hey, we published that first episode January 1st, 2018. It's been a while. It feels like lifetimes ago now.
It really does. It really does.
You're a grandfather. You're yourself a COVID survivor. It's amazing.
Yes. I would put in a plug for photobiomodulation as a mitigating treatment for COVID-19. And I also certainly know that you endorse the ideas of vitamin C and vitamin D3 and zinc and those kind of prophylactic treatments. Well, I did all of that, and it certainly kept me out of the hospital. And I think that all of those really have helped keep me from losing my cognitive functioning and becoming one of those long haulers that people are talking about now.
Yeah, we've talked a little bit about that on the show, the long COVID, and that's definitely maybe another conversation, because I'm actually interested in primarily discussing the study that you just completed. I do want to give just a little bit more of a framework for photobiomodulation. A lot of our listeners probably are familiar, but if you could just kind of reintroduce the idea of photobiomodulation, please.
What we're talking about is the idea that light, different frequencies of light, have a very different kind of impact on our brain functioning. And what we found is that specific frequencies of infrared light, that bandwidth that's above the red part of the frequency, the spectrum that we can see, but it's just above that. So that frequency band has a great deal to do with the life that exists on the planet, but it's also a frequency band that has very specific biological effects on our brain. And so when you shine this frequency of light on the body, and it can penetrate the skull just like it can penetrate the skin to a certain degree, you impact the functioning of one of the parts of the cell that's called the mitochondria. And that part of the cell produces a chemical that is very important to all biological activity. It's called adenosine triphosphate. And
ATP.
We refer to ATP.
Okay.
And so ATP gets produced more rapidly and more productively in the brain. And so if there's a need for the brain to repair a part of the body or a part of the brain, it can then have the resources that it needs to do that. And what we found is that certain frequencies of light, the wavelengths of the light, have different biological effects. So you had Lou Lim, who I have worked with and presented with a number of times in the field at conferences. And Lou's technology at V-Light uses the 810 frequency. And the study that we did and the work that we've been doing over the last 15 years has been with the 1070 nanometer range. And so there's a difference in the biological effects, and we're working on understanding those differences. But the point is that shining light into the brain and on the body has very important and useful impact on overall cognitive and physical function.
Excellent. Yeah, so that's exactly what I wanted to talk about. One clarification, can you clarify the term near infrared light? I think you kind of explained it, but I don't think we used the term near infrared.
It's the frequency, it's the wavelength that is just above what we would consider call the visible red range. So in numerical terms, the visible red range is somewhere up around 700 nanometers. And what we're talking about is with the V-Light, we were talking about 810 nanometers. So it's just barely visible somewhat. But when you're looking at 1070, you can't see it. And so one of the jokes that we make with people is because they're always asking, but I can't see anything. I've got this thing on. How do I know it's working? And I say, look, if you tell me that you can see the light, then the next phone call I have to make is to the Pentagon, because it means I caught an alien.
Okay, right.
And that kind of makes the point. But I'm wanting people to understand that these are wavelengths above the visible range, and partly because of that, it's capable of penetrating the skin and the skull and down into the cortex and affecting the brain tissue directly more easily because of its being a higher wavelength.
Okay. Can you now move into describing the recent clinical trial you guys just completed? I think it was with the Texas A&M Neurosurgery group.
Texas A&M Department of Neurosurgery in Temple, Texas. They work through an affiliate hospital chain called Baylor Scott and White, and it's a big chain of hospitals throughout Texas. And we were working with the Department of Neurosurgery and their chairman, Jason Wang. They took on doing 60 subjects, and we took on doing 40 subjects. And what we were looking to do was assess people's level of memory loss and cognitive functioning, and in some cases, their motor problems, because a lot of the people who were drawn from the sample in Texas also had Parkinson's or some kind of movement disorder. But we assess them in terms of their brain functioning using quantitative EEG, which I know you've talked about on the show before. But we're measuring their brain electrical activity and seeing how it compares to a normative database. And we're also doing a full battery of neuropsych testing, including things that people know, like the clock drawing test and the mini mental status exam and verbal learning assessments and the things like that. So we also had caregivers doing assessments of how people's activities of daily living were changing and their kind of basic behavioral functions as evaluated by the person themselves and also by the caregiver.
So this is an important question. So then I guess a little bit, let's sort of double click on that. How sick were these folks? These were people that already had early, middle stages of dementia.
They had to have a diagnosis. They had to come in with an independent diagnosis of probable Alzheimer's or some sort of non-vascular dementia.
Okay.
So they have to be on the mini mental status score of 0 to 30. We asked people to, who would qualify would be somewhere between 15 and 24.
Okay. So fairly far along. Yeah.
People who were having, considerable difficulty with word finding and memory and locating things and remembering where they were, things like that. What we wanted was people who could understand the instructions, participate in the testing, but basically we were going to give them this equipment, teach the caregiver how to do the treatment, and then we were sending the equipment home with people
Okay.
so that they could do the treatments with the person at home twice a day for 6 minutes.
And so what did
So
the treatment look like? Was this like
it
a
was a helmet type device that had little eye ports that dropped down in front of people's eyes.
mhm.
And so the light was being directed directly into people's eyes and their face, but also all over their head. And so there were about 900 of these LED diodes that were all matched to about 1070 nanometers. And the light was being pulsed on and off 10 times a second.
Okay. You had a placebo in this one?
Yes.
Okay.
So the placebo device did everything that the active treatment device did, except that the LED lights, didn't generate infrared frequency. They didn't do
Okay.
anything.
And so they use it
So
twice a day for 6 minutes?
twice a day for 6 minutes. It was automatically timed. All they had to do was put the device properly on the person's head and then push a button, and the system automatically turned itself on, ran for 6 minutes, turned itself off. And there was a counter built into the device that would tick off the number of treatments.
Okay.
So we knew when we took back the device that people had complied with the protocol, because there'd be the right number on the counter.
And how many weeks did they do the twice a day
So
for
they
these
did that for
8
8 weeks,
weeks? Okay.
and we assessed people just before they took the device home, and then we had them come back in 4 weeks, and then we had them come back at the end at 8 weeks, and we did the same testing procedure using different forms of the instruments, of course, but we did the same testing procedure with them each time.
All right. Interesting. So now that now the big question is what were the results of the group that's been analyzed so far?
Well, what was really great. I mean, let's start with I guess the most important thing is that there were absolutely no reports of any kind of negative side effects at all,
Mm, yeah.
and that's from all 100 subjects that
Okay.
were that went through the protocol. Zero adverse events, and that was consistent with the pilot study that we did last year, 2 years ago, where we only worked with 12 people on a safety trial, and there were zero adverse events. So
Good.
we can safely say that this is a safe way of
Intervention.
doing it.
Yeah.
Now, when we looked at the mini mental status scores, that's a 0 to 30 screening test
Mhm.
that gives you an overall sense of somebody's cognitive functioning. And when you're doing research with that device, if you increase the score by 3 points, so if you go from 21 to 24, that's a significant improvement at the zero point zero 0.05 level of significance, which means that it would be only 5 times in 100 that you would be coming up with an inaccurate conclusion that this was effective.
Yeah.
Well, in this circumstance, the average improvement of the people in the active treatment group compared to the controls, the placebo, was 4.8 points.
Well,
So that's significant at 1 in 1,000. What I want to also point out is that this is only data that's being reported out on the Texas 60 some odd subjects, because Philadelphia, we just finished our treatment cycle of our 40-person cohort about a month ago.
okay.
And they had a head start with us because of their ability to recruit subjects more
Right.
rapidly,
Yeah.
and they finished 2 months ahead of us. So they had a shot at looking at their data before we could look at ours. So
Okay.
I took a look at mine before coming on the show today, and I just looked at a couple of subjects in the last couple of people. And one of the people that we had in the active treatment group, his mini mental status score went up 7 points.
Okay.
He went from a 19 to a 26 in 2 months. I'm surprised and certainly happy for that person. And I have not seen that kind of improvement very often
Yeah.
in the, so I'm just saying there was one kind of wow,
Right.
and there was a rather consistent pattern of, hey, that's pretty darn good.
Well, let me ask you another question. So the person that went from 19 to 26. So just so people know, that's like that's 19 is again a fairly and these are very simple. These are very simple tests, and they don't test for everything. They miss a lot of things, but that's a huge jump. That's a huge jump that you're not supposed to see. First, did the caregiver report, like, did they agree with these differences? It was sort of commensurate with what they were seeing in life.
Yeah, they came in saying, "Don't try and tell me he got the placebo."
Uh-huh.
That was her opening.
So she noticed a clear difference.
And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" Because this is a double blind, so I didn't know either. I had to. The way we did the double blind was that every device had a code on the helmet, and I would need to send the code to the manufacturer of the device, who was in the UK. He would then send me back an email with a P or an A.
Okay.
So that's how I found out. So I sent the email, I got back A, and we were both, quite happy that, he had gotten the active treatment.
Yes.
But his, just seeing him walk in the door, I knew that something had happened because he walked in, he made good eye contact. He said, "Hello, Dr. Berman." And I said, "How was the drive over?" And he said, "Oh, it was pretty good. We did hit a little traffic over at the Pennsylvania Turnpike." These are things that he couldn't possibly have been able to say at the beginning. He wouldn't have known where he was. He wouldn't have known that he was on the Pennsylvania Turnpike. He wouldn't have been able to say that whole sentence. It was a remarkably different person who walked in.
Yeah. So just to respond to that, that's really interesting. I'm optimistic, and I'm also just, well, does everybody get those results? Because we've seen just stuff in our office where people with dementia, when we start to intervene, doing any variety of kind of introduction of energy into their neurosystem, through their, like you're mentioning, through the cranium. We've seen people be able to remember words more quickly. We've seen people remember things from their past. We've seen people have moments of lucidity. It doesn't seem to fundamentally be changing the disease, right? It doesn't seem to be fundamentally changing the disease, which I guess is that's sort of a bigger question, because a lot of, for a number of people, our goals are, hey, how do we tap into whatever brain functions left? How do we get more good days, hours, weeks, months, years even? So I guess that's really the question for somebody like you, you have more look back in this field than I do at this point. Like, how do you see this kind of intervention fitting into the kind of current dementia care model, or even other neurodegenerative disorders like frontal temporal and
That's a great
things like that?
question, and I mean it's something we all we struggle with, and where we've come down at the foundation, and what we've been promoting is kind of a three-legged stool, and one leg is the photobiomodulation, which does in fact alter the at a tissue level. It does influence the pathology and the progression of the disease at a fundamental level. I mean,
Hmm.
your basic neurodegenerative process is a function of two basic causal factors. One is hypoperfusion or lack of blood flow, and the other is inflammation. So, if you can positively intervene on both hypoperfusion and inflammation with a non-invasive, safe system of delivery, energy delivery and therapeutic intervention, well, then that's a pretty good thing. And we found that photobiomodulation is that type of intervention. You've talked about Bredesen's work on this show, right?
Oh, sure. Yeah, he's been on the show
I
a couple
thought it
times.
was. Yeah, I listened to that show. So when Bredesen came out with his 36 holes in the roof, one of the things that I did was then look at the literature on photobiomodulation, and I found that 32 of the 36 holes in the roof can be positively influenced by photobiomodulation alone. So
Yeah.
it's really important that the Bredesen protocol and all of the pragmatics around doing functional medicine and doing these kind of, treatment protocols can understand that photobiomodulation in and of itself can significantly address many of the causal factors that seem to, influence memory loss and loss of cognitive functioning and
Yeah.
in the bigger picture. So anyway, that's one leg of the stool. The other two legs, I think the functional medicine part really does have to be strongly considered, because if there's Lyme disease or any of the tick-borne illnesses that people don't even know they have, that has to be dealt with directly. If they have heavy metals or mold or any of those other kind of toxicities, now if they have any kind of COVID, sequelae, any of that's going to be mitigating a factor for long-term problems with, neurological functioning. But beyond that, all of those different factors can be managed using functional medicine, but it means changing your lifestyle. I mean, there's a big piece to that is more challenging than this, where you're just sticking a lamp on your head for 6 minutes twice a day.
Right. Yeah.
It's critically important to consider all of those other factors. The third part is the part that I think gets missed a lot, and that's that when you damage the tissue in the body, especially when you damage the tissue in the brain, you are then also disrupting the neuroelectrical functioning of the brain networks, the communication networks in the brain itself. That's where we get back to neurofeedback. And I think that when you combine neurofeedback with the photobiomodulation and the functional medicine, that combination is going to give you a much better result.
Mm. Okay, that's it. That's the
The trifecta.
the trifecta, as it were. So we'll probably talk about neurofeedback a little bit more in another episode. Because I'm we sort of continue to stay interested in neurofeedback. Is this just to kind of wrap up? We didn't need to be this a huge long conversation, because these results are exciting, and is this like the kind of device that you're using now? Is this like commercially available? People can go out and get them?
We actually have developed a relationship. The foundation has developed a relationship with a company that is providing us with a specially designed helmet that is using the 1070 nanometer wavelength. It wasn't available before we started working with the company, and they're making this for us. So we're making it available to people, and we're going to want to try and collect data on how they, use it. But we have a device that's now available for purchase, and we're going to talk to people about this as a kind of ongoing relationship. So
Is that,
we can
when you say we, you're talking about Quiet Mind Foundation, the
foundation,
not
yeah.
for profit?
So
Okay.
people can contact us, and we'll be able to work with them on integrating the 1070 nanometer or the 810 nanometer light. But we can control the pulse rate much more closely, and that's going to be very important, I think, in terms of getting the best results for people. Is the turn on
Oh,
and off.
okay. Say what you mean a little bit more by
When
the pulse rate, and
you
then
pulse
compare it to
something,
the.
you're literally turning the lights on and off. And by
Mhm.
turning the lights on and off, you're getting you're getting an increase in the penetration of the light into the body, but you're also influencing the brain to start to mimic the frequency of whatever frequency the light is being pulsed at. Your brain is going to start your EEG. Your brain is going to start producing that frequency. So if we know that your brain is producing too much slow brainwave activity and not enough fast brainwave activity, we can then target the pulse rate to actually entrain or stimulate the production of that diminished level of functioning. And that has been shown to be very effective, especially in terms of improving people's cognitive functioning. And also, more recently, there's been a considerable amount of attention paid to the 40 hertz, the 40 times a second
Yeah.
stimulation, as having a direct effect on decreasing beta amyloid.
Yes. Yeah, from a couple of different technologies, but are you making the determination about the pulse rate or how frequently you want the based on the EEG and brain map?
Yeah, and we can make that on the EEG and brain map, and then we can use this new device to simply tap in the frequency, the pulse rate that we want, and we can pick any frequency from 1 to 20,000. I mean, it doesn't matter that it's 20,000, but we can go anywhere from 1 to several hundred hertz if we wanted to.
Did the participants in the study, the recent study,
They all got
was that
10. They
personalized
all got
or was
10.
it 10,
Yeah.
10 hertz?
So we know that 10 hertz is going to be effective, but now it's about how can we customize the treatment for people even more closely and make it more durable.
Personalized.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's fascinating. And can you just make a comment on your experience with this sort of newer device, the one that you just did the clinical trial on,
Right.
where you've seen some of these interesting results, versus something like a V light, which you and I have talked about before?
I think that
Which is,
I think this is going to be recognized as a more effective intervention than the V light by virtue of some of the other biological effects that appear to happen at the 1070 nanometer wavelength that apparently don't happen at the 810. So that when you can see actual decreases in some of the neurotoxins like the A beta 42 or the phosphorylated tau, you
yeah,
can see that that is actually
yeah,
demonstrably decreasing while there's increasing activity of heat shock proteins that are specifically being produced to stop the process of cell death. So those are things that have been shown to happen at
yes.
1070 in that range that are not necessarily happening at the lower wavelength.
Wow. So I guess my one of my final questions here, if not the final question, is, I mean, how much does it cost? It's probably not cheap because, of course, I'm thinking about several patients, and obviously, this is not covered by insurance at this point.
The unit that we're getting made for us now is $3,995,
Ooh, okay.
and we're going to work with people around fees, and we're going to cover. We're not going to charge for our consultation time. We're just going to charge to cover the cost of the equipment. And the 810 nanometer model is 2,995. So there's $1,000 difference
Okay.
because the LEDs are that
Okay.
expensive.
Well, but if it's a game changer, it's a game changer. And if we can, if there's enough people that are demonstrating benefit eventually, you move it to a phase 3 trial and, then eventually insurance has no, no excuse but to cover it eventually. But of course, that's a longer road.
Our goal is to get accelerated action the same way that people with COVID tests are now getting accelerated action and the COVID vaccines are getting it. We're hoping to get accelerated action designation for the light therapy for dementia because there's 150 million people that need this right now,
That's right.
and everybody with COVID. That's why I started off this conversation with everybody with COVID needs to be doing this.
Well, so I again always appreciate your time, Marvin. That's the Quiet Mind Foundation will of course post the organizations. This is Dr. Berman's not-for-profit that he runs, where they do the research out of. We'll post the information in the show notes. Anything else you want to say here?
It's always great to talk with you, and I will certainly be happy to come back and give you the final results of once we crunch all the numbers for all 100 subjects.
Excellent. Thank you so much, everybody. Stay healthy. All the best, Marvin.
Bye.
So that's our episode. I hope it was useful to you. Check out the show notes on iTunes or on our website where we've summarized the key points. If you find the information here valuable, please consider giving us a 5-star rating on iTunes and leaving comments in the comments section. It will really help us bring this message to as many people as we can. If you have questions or comments, connect with us on social media. Finally, to support us, go to patreon.com/evolvingpast and consider hitting the button and becoming a patron of this show. That's Patreon, Patreon, patreon.com/evolvingpast. Thanks, and talk to you next time.